Hi, I'm Ted. Welcome to The Play's the Thing, where we put the play back in Shakespeare. Today's video I want to talk about how to design lessons and units so that first you can engage students in a fun and very energetic way, you can build their skills, and so third they can get to that point where they can actually perform Shakespeare. So a couple points philosophically. First of all, I'm a huge believer in teaching Shakespeare through performance. I just think that that's the best way to learn it. It's the way it was meant to be experienced, I think, to begin with. So it's almost all in the classroom and performance based. And so that takes time for sure. And so there are some things we have to do in order to get through the content. We'll talk about that in the video. Second, although I believe in standards, I'm not a slave to them. And so I'm going to really put the emphasis on developing skill sets and developing confidence over time, and the literary aspects and the speaking and listening skills will come with time, and we'll put some small assessments in to make sure that they're covered, but I'm not going to obsess about them. Okay, so the relationship between the lesson and the unit kind of breaks down into this. When you think about many learning situations, you begin with some sort of warm-up, and then you have some skills, and then some skills into drills, and then drills into some sort of performance. So whether you're a musician, you start with your scales, and you work on some fingering, get your fingers warmed up. Then you apply some patterns into some different drills, and you apply that to work on the song, and then ultimately get to the concert. Same thing with sports. You start with a dynamic warm-up, and then you work on some skills. So if you're in baseball, if you're a batter, you work on some swing mechanics, and if you're maybe you're a football player, you'll work on your throwing mechanics, and then that will go into some drills with similar position players, and that will go into team, and then ultimately you'll do scrimmage or game. So I like to do the exact same thing when I'm teaching Shakespeare. So the first part of the lesson is some sort of introduction and warm-up, and it's designed to sort of build those skills in a progressive way as we go through the unit. And then once we've done that, then we move into covering the content, and we're going to perform the scene in class, do different exercises with the actual content of the scene. And so that's how I structure each one of my lessons. When thinking about the unit as a whole, again, if you're a Marzano follower or Stephen Covey and beginning with the end of mind or backwards design, I always want to think about what do I want my students to be able to do or what they want them to know at the end of the unit. And for sure, I want them to understand Shakespeare and what happens in Romeo and Juliet or whatever the play is and the content, the themes, and that's all well and good. But really, I want them to have the skill set in order to be able to perform a scene. And so I work towards that, and I consider that sort of phase 3 at the end. Now to get to phase 3, obviously you got to do phase 2. And phase 2 is, well, how do you develop those skills that they need? And so I structure a lot of the warm-up and skill building at the beginning of class geared towards activities in text. How do we understand the text and what it really means? How do we work on our voice so we can actually speak the speech as I pronounced it to you trippingly on the tongue? How do we use space? How do we build characters? And those different components like that. And so that's sort of the phase 2 lessons I do for warm-ups. But obviously before we get to stage 2, you got to get to stage 1. And pedagogically, there's so much talk about, that beginning part is clearing up misconceptions that students have. And the number one misconception that I want to clear up is that, Shakespeare's this old, boring, dead guy that's only for, super, stuck-up, snobby people. And usually I have to say, look, a good part of Shakespeare's audience couldn't even read, and honestly, there are more sex jokes in the beginning of Romeo and Juliet than an entire episode of Game of Thrones. So it can be very accessible. So those phase 1 activities are usually silly. The higher energy and the sillier the better. And get on their feet and running around and doing a bunch of activities. And it's all about building familiarity with the language, so it doesn't sound so foreign. And before they know it, it's like, oh, it's something familiar, and it's not so scary. And so phase 1 is all about those activities. Okay, so let's provide some examples. Say we're just getting started with the play, and I may do some background information on the globe and how a lot of times I'll talk about how Shakespeare distributed his parts. So I always say, well, Shakespeare didn't want anybody to download his plays illegally, so he only gave the actors their lines, and the main script was kept under lock and key. And so I give some background information, but I'm not sure if that's critical. I think that's up to the individual teacher. What are they most interested in? What whatever they think the student's going to be interested in as far as that background information. And then I always begin with like a 15-minute version of play, and I have some videos on that, or have a video, and I'll say I put the link in the description, and that's just improving the entire play right off the bat, so students don't get lost in the plot and the characters. You can cover that earlier, and again, it's super low risk, it's highly engaging, it's entertaining, it makes it fun. And then a lot of the beginning of class, I'll start with silly sounds activity or surfing the text or something that's very basic, gets them moving and experiencing the text. And I tell them, don't worry about understanding anything. I'll explain that later on. Don't worry about that, just go with it, and that starts to build the confidence. And then once we've done that 10 maybe 15 minutes, then we break it down. I ask for volunteers to play different parts. Sometimes I have to suggest some parts to play, and we get up and we just act it out in class. And at first I just sort of explain things as we go. Hey, try this, and different directing techniques as we go through, but it's really, everything's good at that point. I just sort of we run it and we explain, and very basic to start. When we get into phase 2, we'll start doing more text-based activities. So, all right, try it this way? How do the words in this line communicate different connotational meanings? And that becomes important. Or, let's focus on our diction even a little bit more. Or where are the breaks in the text? Where are the words that show there's a shift in the way that you may want to deliver that line? Different activities like where's the stage directions that are embedded? Shakespeare's telling you as actors what to do. And so we'll do those type of activities now, involve a little bit more skill and a little bit more of understanding what the language does, but gets them to that phase 3. So we'll do that for 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer to start class, and then same thing, we'll go back into acting out the scenes as we go, and I'll play the director and offer some suggestions about how to play the scene as we go. And then when we get to phase 3, now we finished the play, and my final assessment is pick a scene, get scene partners, and perform it. Memorize your lines, and I'll run them through a workshop. And again, I'll post another video on that. Some 7 tips on how to really memorize Shakespeare, and then give them about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. We're on a block schedule, so we meet every other day. And hey, we're going to perform on that Friday. And so they all rehearse, and I helped them out through the course of the the rehearsal. And then the last day, they get very basic costumes and some basic props, and they perform. And it's incredible. It's just amazing to see what students can come up with over the course of a couple weeks, and it's really kind of the highlight of my year. So another factor, obviously, is time. And if we're doing it all in class, there's not a lot of homework being done with it, and it can take 4, 5, 6 weeks, which can be a big hit on content. So my work around that is that I assign something easier as part of that sort of homework component. And what I'm moving really towards is more of like an online class continuum. So for example, if I'm doing 9th graders, maybe do the Pearl. We just finished things they carried with my juniors, and so I can assign that almost like an online class. Many students, well, not many, but there's several students in our school who are taking online college classes by junior, senior year. It's becoming such a more prevalent part of education that it's a good idea, I think, for students to have that experience. So I structure it very much like an online class. I post all the materials. Here's the readings. Here's some questions you can answer on a forum. Here's some writing assignments, and I send them off to do it that way. Now, obviously, when students come into class, I clarify questions. Hey, everybody all set with the homework, or what questions are. So if there's any students that are struggling, I can help them. And of course, with technology, we're a Google Classroom school. It's easy for me to post materials, and of course, with email, it's actually fairly easy to stay in contact with students in case they need any help. But that allows us to meet the curriculum time needs that we need to get through the content, but at the same time, do all that Shakespeare work in class. I think it's a recipe for disaster to send kids home to read Shakespeare, unless they're an AP student or they've had plenty of experience with it. But to send Shakespeare neophytes home with it, I think is really bad idea, and I haven't had very good luck with it. So that's kind of why I've evolved to this program. A couple more notes on assessment. As we get closer towards the end, really as we're into that rehearsal phase, I have some more traditional, well, I can't even say they're traditional, but they're more text-based activities to really look at that standard. So I have them do intentions, attention notebook, intention notebook, which just means, hey, tell me what this line means and how do you feel about that line? What are you trying to do with that line? And I'll put together, again, all of these activities. I'll do videos as we come up through. I do memorization quizzes every couple of days, just kind of work on how those lines coming. I'll have them do a character web as far as, if you think about the 5 methods of characterization, your appearance, your actions, how others feel about you, your speech, your thoughts. So put that together. What does it say about you as a character? And they can assemble all that. So that's work that I have them do through that rehearsal process. And I do have them do that for homework. So hopefully we're all done sort of with our online component by that point, and they pass in that material. And then the kids, who are really nervous about performing, I always say, look, if you do all the preparation work that I've asked you to do, I guarantee you're going to be successful. No matter if you get super nervous on stage and forget all your lines and some sort of disaster happens, I don't care. We're fine with that. The other work that you do is going to be much more important. Of course, the reality is if you've done all that prep work, disasters never happen. I've never had it happen before. It's just usually a pretty powerful experience. And it usually comes up into, you get 3 groups of kids. There's always one, or, not always, but many times there's one that's, it's terrifying and never want to do it again. And that makes sense. It's certainly scary, and I can certainly understand that through introverts. You'll get a big chunk of your kids who will say, that was pretty, it's scary, but I'm really proud of myself. I'm glad I did it. And then you get another, actually surprisingly more kids, that was really cool. Can we do that again? And when you've reached that point, then you had a great, it's been a great success. So that's how I designed my units and my lessons. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. If you've had success stories or things that have been challenged, post those in the comments. Let's get a dialogue going. I'm happy to answer them anytime. It's such a powerful experience that I've had over and over and over and over again. And I want to be able to share that with other teachers out there as well, because Shakespeare can be certainly tough to teach, but it can also be one of the most rewarding things. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. If this video has been helpful, hit that like button. Please consider subscribing. And until next time, I hope you're putting the play back in Shakespeare.